Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Hi, everybody. It's Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so happy to celebrate that this is the 100th episode of Freelance Writing Direct. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. I've so enjoyed all the interviews, and there's so much more, and my guests have been fantastic, and you are fantastic. And thank you so much for rating and reviewing it on iTunes and for following on YouTube and on Substack. And I'm very excited that I'm going to be doing an Ask Me Anything with Ali Walansky, who I recently had on the program. And if you're interested in attending, email me at freelancewritingdirect@gmail.com to get on the list and also to get the Zoom link. That'll be for September 5th from 4:30 to 5:30. And I hope you enjoy today's episode with my fantastic guest, Beth Ann Fennelly. Thank you so much for being here and supporting me and the podcast, and for getting my book, which is now out as an audiobook. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct, and I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so happy to have Beth Ann Fennelly with us today. And I want to tell you a little bit about Beth Ann. She's the Poet Laureate of Mississippi from 2016 to 2021, teaches in the MFA Program at the University of Mississippi, where she is a 4-time teaching award winner. She's received grants from the N.E.A, the United States Arts, the Academy of American Poets, and a Fulbright to Brazil. Her work has won a Pushcart Prize and 3 times been included in the Best American Poetry series. Fennelly has published 3 poetry books, Open House, Tenderhooks, and Unmentionables, and a book of nonfiction, Great with Child, all published with W.W. Norton. A novel she co-authored with her husband, Tom Franklin, called The Tilted World, was published by HarperCollins. Her 6th book, Heating and Cooling, 52 Micro-Memoirs with Norton, was named an Atlanta Journal-Constitution Best Book, a Goodreaders Favorite for 2017, and the winner of the Housatonic Book Prize. Fennelly and Franklin live in Oxford with their 3 children, and I'll share her website in the show notes. It's BethAnnFennelly.com, and that's FENNELLY.com. Welcome. It is so great to have you here with the program.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Estelle.
Well, as you know, I use your book as part of my syllabus when I teach Micro-Memoir at NYU. And I love it. It's just such a great teaching tool, and B, has so many wonderful examples from very, very short, just a few sentences, to a little over a page and a half of micro memoirs. And you cover in such succinct ways with depth. You cover marriage, you cover motherhood, you cover parenting a teenager, which I can totally relate to at this point in my life. My daughter's 15, and you cover misogyny. You cover so many elements, including grief of losing your mom and the sudden loss of your sister. And can you tell me how you decided, A, to write this book, and B, how you decided to structure it? Because I'm always so fascinated at people who watch and listen to the podcast know that I'm fascinated by the way that writers decide to structure their work.
Before I published Heating and Cooling, I published the book that you kindly mentioned, the novel that I'd written with my husband. And that ended up being a pretty big project because I had never written a novel before and we had never collaborated before. And we were trying to do all that, and stay married. I mean, like lots of learning on how to negotiate it all. And it's a historical novel based on the flood of the Mississippi River in 1927. So we had to do a lot of research. And in the middle of all this research, I got knocked up for the third time. So we had a little newborn baby all of a sudden. So, which is a long way of saying the novel took 4 years to write, 4 years for 2 people. So that's kind of high stakes, that's 8 years. So when it was done, I wasn't sure what I was going to write next. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll write my own novel. Maybe I'm a novelist now. And every day I would go to my notebook and I would wait for this big project to announce itself with gravitas. And instead, I was writing, funny little memories, things I remember, and I'm not really sure why I remember them, or a bit of overheard conversation that charmed me or annoyed me, or a strange dream or a beautiful image. And I was feeling frustrated in that I wasn't writing because nothing I was doing looked like writing that I had done before and recognized. And then one day I realized I was having fun. And as I've gotten older, I've learned to trust fun, instead of the thing that we're trying not to do. If I'm having fun, just keep going in that vein. And I started reading my notebook chronologically, which is not its purpose. It's not supposed to be read like a diary or something. But as I was reading it, I was realizing these little things, they don't really want to be bigger than they are. They know their own size and they're content to be small, and they're trying to see how much they can do in this small space. And I came up with the term micro-memoir. And when I did that, it gave me permission really to complete the book project. And I realized, in fact, that it was almost complete.
Wow. So you're the author of the term micro-memoir.
I mean, I feel it's a weird thing to claim, but I have done Google searches since because I feel like I had never heard the term. And then I thought of it. It was useful to me. I started talking about it. And I can't find other people using the term before then. So maybe they were, and maybe it's a weird thing to try to lay claim to, but it was coming up with that word gave me permission. And that's why I'm grateful to it.
That's amazing. I love that. And you have it right in your title, 52 Heating and Cooling, 52 Micro Memoirs. So you put these ideas together and you kind of just had them on the page and you didn't have a chronological plan for them. What became the plan for positioning them? Why would something be in the beginning or something at the end or even in the middle, the messy middle?
Yeah. So the question structure is a tricky one for me. And that's one reason why I love that you talk about it and are always asking questions about it. I think it's interesting when people kind of confess. For me, when I realized I was writing this book of small pieces, I decided there would be 100. I thought, 100 is a really nice round number. I know several books of really short things. Joy Williams has one, it's 100 pieces. I know a couple other small books with 100 small pieces. And I sent it to my editor and she said, it's a little too much. And I said, yeah, I kind of think so too, but it's too much what? Like what are there weaker pieces I should take out? She's like, no, it's not that there are pieces that are weaker. There's just too much. I said, too much what? She said, too much of you, which I thought was so funny. Like too much me. I kind of understood what she meant in a way that I cover myself from different parts of my life, from my girlhood to now.
Right.
different roles I have, as you were mentioning, like being a mom, being a wife, being a teacher, being a feminist, being a human walking around on planet Earth. And it's very varied tonally. Like some pieces are really poetic, and some are deliberately flat, and some are like true narratives, and some, some is varied lengthwise. The shortest one is 9 words, the longest one is 4 pages. So ultimately, there just seems like I needed to find a kind of cohesion. And what I ended up doing actually is I cut all the pieces set outside of the South, which is a little strange, but I get a lot of inspiration when I'm traveling. But ultimately, it seemed like when the reader came across the book, to all of a sudden, like Mississippi, then one piece in Prague with no segue, and then, Mississippi, or a generic location, and then one piece in Brazil or one piece in Germany. It just kind of seemed too much. So I cut those pieces, and then I cut pieces that referred to any character that wasn't recurring in the book, just to get rid of some of the relationships and locations. And then there were 52 pieces left after all that. So I thought, okay, it's a book of 52 pieces. So that is randomly how I came up with 52. And now when I do readings, everyone is like, oh, did you choose 52 because, there's 52 weeks in a year and 52 cards in a deck, all this stuff. And mom was like, yeah, absolutely. In truth, it was just what was left.
Wow. And that comment that I think it was your editor made about there's too much you, it made me think of this piece on page 30, why I'm switching salons. We can put on a top coat with glitter, said the manicurist. We've noticed you like attention.
Is that so great? So the funny thing about that piece is I was getting a manicure, and the woman actually did say that to me, but then our conversation continued on and we were talking about other things. But in my head, I circled back to it. I thought, wow, that was a really bitchy thing to say. That is actually hysterically bitchy, right? Um,
Yes.
and so what I ended up doing was just taking those one lines, and I cleared out all the rest of the conversation. And it's almost like the white space around that piece allows it to be as ridiculous as it is. And that's one thing I love about writing in the short form, Estelle, because I feel like it makes you more attentive to the moments as they happen. Because, you look at this big conversation you have with someone for an hour, and there's all these highs and lows of conversation. But if you clear it out with white space and just like shine a light on it, the moment can reveal itself in all its kind of grotesquerie or fabulousness. And it allows you to kind of dial in, I think, to the moment as it's happening, because you don't want to miss those moments.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, and a beautiful way of, I always say that nothing in life is ever wasted when you're a writer. And
Mhm.
you really took this, yes, it's a bitchy moment, and you kind of made it your own by putting it in the pages of your book. And look, I'm the person who wrote the book, writing that gets noticed. So I'm
I have it right
completely,
here. I love it.
thank you so much. That I can't even tell you. I'm like tearing up here. That means so much to me. It really does.
Yeah, there's lots of great advice in it.
Thank you so much. Yes, my Estelle's Edge, which is a little structuring device there, a little framing device. So back to heating and cooling. What I love about the way that you write short, and writing short is really an art, but you talk about the story within the situation and often it's at the end where it packs a potent punch. So it's like on page 27, I'm going to read it. Watch what you say about younger sisters within older sisters' earshot. Things like what beautiful curls the little one has and what long eyelashes. 40 years later, I can still feel the yank on my scalp as my 4-year-old sister pulled my curls so she could shear them. Can still feel as I sat trapped by the high chair's embrace, her finger forcing my eyelid down. Can still hear the scissors snick, snick. Funny, but what I wonder at now is not that she did it, but that when I realized she was going to do it, I didn't struggle. She was going to do it whether I liked it or not, so I sat still. Even then, I had an instinct for self-preservation. And you see, I was right. I am alive, and she isn't. Wow, Beth Ann. that certainly takes us on a journey as the reader. Okay. We're dealing with a situation, right, of the hair cutting and the sibling, and then the way that you end, and that's intentional. I mean, a poet, there's nobody more intentional than a poet with placement of words. And I've spoken with Maggie Smith on the program.
She's
And
great.
wonderful. And again, somebody who is a poet, and the word choice is intentional. Did this evolve, or did you know you wanted to pull a piece from your childhood and use it to elaborate on the real truth of the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes when I'm teaching nonfiction to students who are new to nonfiction but coming to it from other genres, I talk to them about the difference between nonfiction and other forms of writing. For example, in an academic paper, you begin with the argument, and if you struggle to come to that opinion, you edit that out. You know that you don't entertain any gray areas or any possibilities of different positions. Or the off recited anecdote that is a familiar form, you know, a story someone tells at dinner, they tell it the exact same way every time because they know how to achieve the best effect. And when you're telling that anecdote, you know, it might be like how you met your spouse or something. You don't discover anything new in the telling. You're just kind of almost reciting. And the difference for me with nonfiction is you're starting with a place of curiosity. You're returning to the past with a question you're genuinely troubled by. And by returning to the past and lingering there, you're trying to answer the question and satisfy your own curiosity. And by doing that, you're discovering something you didn't know before you began writing. So that piece started as a family anecdote and remained that way for 40 years until I wrote that, which is to say, you know, yes, 100% of the pieces in this book are nonfiction, so it's all fact. So a funny story, a haha funny story told throughout my childhood was how my sister cut my hair and my eyelashes off, you know, because she was one of those little bald kids, and, you know, she was bigger but bald, and I came out, you know, with a lot of hair, and, you know, she was jealous. People would always say, oh, look at her curls or look at her eyelashes. My sister was jealous. So one day when my dad was supposed to be watching us and instead was watching the Cubs, she cut off, you know, my hair, my eyelashes. So that's, oh, such a funny story in my family. But there was always something about it to me and the bottom of that anecdote that I never got to figure out. And part of it is, how could it be a funny story when really, like, a 4-year-old girl with scissors at someone's eye, I could be blind, right? But the other thing is, when I think about that memory, I just remember being calm because some part of me understood that by struggling, I'd make it worse. And I was curious to see that trait in myself way back then, and then to link it to this greater part of the family story that doesn't really get told, you know, which sibling has the trait that's going to allow her to get out of trouble and which doesn't, you know.
And survive. Yeah. I mean, you talk about your mom and she had cancer, right?
Yes, she has Alzheimer's. In the book, I talk about her breast cancer. She did survive that, but of course, no one survives Alzheimer's, so that's where we are now. So I do write a lot about her illness and the situation I find myself in, where I'm caring for kids and caring for my mother at the same time.
Yeah. My dad has Alzheimer's, so I completely
Gosh,
relate.
Estelle, we need to have a cocktail. Teenage kids and a parent with
We,
Alzheimer's.
we do. We do. I actually wrote an essay for the New York Times singing my dad back to me when I used to be able to sing to reach him, but now he's too far gone. I really can't do that anymore, but I would love to. The next time we are in the same area for a conference or something, we definitely will. So we talked about structure. I want to talk to you also about through lines, because through lines is another fascination of mine. And did you decide what the through lines would be for your pieces, or was it just a combination of your interests. And through lines is just like a thread that goes throughout, I guess, half of them or a variety of them.
Mhm. Yeah, it's nothing that I intentionally did in advance, but I do love a moment when I'm reading someone's book and like a minor character like trots on through a story. For example, Jennifer Egan's book of short stories, The Goon Squad, is so fascinating. And there'd be a story where someone is a main character and someone else is just mentioned peripherally, and then they get their own story later in the book, and you are reading about them knowing this one awesome detail that you carried with you from 4 stories earlier. So while I love that moment, I hadn't set out to do that, but I do know what my preoccupations were. And one of them in that book was this idea of married love, because my husband and I have been married for 26 years. And
Oh,
I think our culture doesn't really have an ethos that appreciates the love of people who've been hanging out day after day, year after year. You know, we focus on young love with our movies and our songs, or unrequited love. But the kind of dailiness of everyday love is kind of interesting and a little funny. So I knew when I was writing those pieces that they were entertaining me because I hadn't read that type of thing before. So it turned out that I had a long series there spaced throughout the book, and they're just called Married Love with different numbers. And some are shorter and some are longer, but they all seem to fall into that category of everyday love.
yes, like you give one example. It's a very short one, but it's sort of like when we cuddle. I'm not going to say it exactly, but when we cuddle, my hand lands on the cyst on his back, and I thought, oh yeah, that is such an expression of, people have been together for so long that it's not a weird thing. It's just this is what we do.
Yeah, it's
I'm
not
moving
weird, and it's
on.
weird that it's not weird. You know, that like it could be comforting actually to when you
Yeah.
hug someone to know exactly where their back cyst is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going on 19 years with my husband, so I completely understand. And you're right, there's nothing about the ethos. Like I never see that, even in novels, even in books. And if it is, it's the familiarity breeds contempt
Right.
part of it. So I think you really hit on something that maybe you have to coin a new term, Beth Ann. I mean, really, that makes so much sense. So, speaking of husbands, what was it like co-authoring a novel with your husband? I know it took 8 years,
Mhm.
but what was that actual combining of forces in a professional capacity like for you?
Well, it was really fun. You know, we had been married for a long, long time before we started it. And I thought we knew each other just as well as it was possible to know someone else, but we had never collaborated before. And it was fun to get in each other's brains and into each other's stories. And although we're both writers, we met the first day of graduate school at the University of Arkansas in our MFA program. You know, Tommy got his degree in fiction, I got my degree in poetry, and we tend to be drawn to different topics. Tommy's actually from the woods in Alabama. He's first generation college student, and he comes from a kind of difficult and violent country home life, a lot of hunting and all that. And he tends to be drawn towards stories that have a lot of violence in them. And that's not something I'm interested in. But we hit upon a story that appealed to us both for different reasons, and we both brought our strengths to it. But in terms of literally like how we organized it, which I think is part what your question is, Estelle, we had 2 point of view characters. We had a female and a male. So the idea is I would write from the female point of view a chapter, email it to Tommy. He'd write a chapter from the point of view of the male chapter, email it to me. We'd alternate and be done in a year. And that didn't happen. But really, the novel only got fun to write when we stopped doing this separate thing of my character and your character. And we started mucking up in each other's stories and opening each other's chapters and getting in there. And by the end of the process, we were composing aloud. We were doing this thing we were calling it dueling laptops. So you can see how little my office is. And we'd be in here kneecap to kneecap with our laptops up like a game of Battleship. And we would be typing and talking and writing sentence by sentence. And that's when it got really fun. So it was a blast to write with him. And then book tour was a blast because you know, I got to be in all these nice hotel rooms with my honey. So that was pretty fun.
You know what I love about you? You talk about fun, and so many writers. I mean, you're a poet laureate. I mean, so many writers are like, oh, it's the eruditeness of it all. And it's really not. It really is expressing yourself in a way that's going to resonate with your reader if you
Yeah.
boil it down. And so if it is fun, if you find the fun in it, then it allows you to express what you need to express in a easier way. That's what I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we get away from fun at our peril. But when I was younger, I never really talked about like the pleasure of it because I felt like if I wanted to sound intellectual, I had to be miserable like everyone else. And it was a process of growing older and becoming more comfortable with my own personality where I realized like poetry should be hedonism. We should only be doing it for pleasure. There's certainly no money in it, so why are we not addressing that as an important quality of writing, that it should be fun to write and fun to read, and
Yeah.
not at the exclusion of the other important parts of it. But I do think it's a little strange somehow that we really don't talk about like the pleasure of it.
I agree. And how does one become a poet? You know what I mean? Like, are you like 5 years old and 7 years old and going like, I want to be a poet one day? Like, how does that evolve? It's such an interesting area to focus on. And B, it's such a great way to learn how to work with words, to be able to write anything, I believe.
Yeah, I was just one of those weird kids. I just liked to read all the time and I had a big imagination and I could entertain myself for hours. And I liked to do all the creative things and I kept a journal, but I actually thought I wanted to be an actress and I was horrible,
Me too. I wanted to
horrible.
be an actress.
That's funny. Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that was not going to be my path. Even when I went to college, I wasn't really sure. And then, it pretty very quickly became apparent that that was not going to be my path. But I took my first poetry writing workshop and I loved it. And I had a great teacher. And I was just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So that was a great discovery.
And it also, I mean, being an actress, there's a certain amount of creativity in that. So being a poet, it's working with words. There's creativity and there's a performative aspect to it. Like I feel there's a performative aspect to what I do, teaching to a crowd of students or leading a webinar or speaking. That's performative. So it definitely has that element of being somebody out in the public, whether you're an actress or not. But I've seen writers who've been in their own, the movies that have represented, like Joanna Rackoff, My Salinger Year. I just actually watched that and I had her as a guest on the program. And so she had a role like at the very end. It was just like a walk on. She didn't speak, but I was like, yeah, go for it.
Awesome.
I want to know what your daily writing process is. Is it like you sit down every day, button chair, or are you what one of my guests, Ann Hood, told me she's a volcano writer? It comes all out of her. And I use that all the time because I think I'm like that.
Ann Hood is so wonderful. I love her. Her personality is so awesome and affirming and warm. I try to write every day, but I have a complicated life that doesn't always allow that. So I'm forgiving of myself if I can't, but in the dream, I wake up and I get my kids off to school and I come to my desk before I have done the bad things like checking email or looking at the visa bill, or getting online and looking at the politics, all those horrible things that are distracting. So my dream would be to come to my desk in the morning without having done the bad things I can do to distract myself, like looking at politics online or checking my visa or, doing all that stuff. Just come to the desk, having hopefully woken up from dreamland not so long ago, and try to stay in that dream world, writing and reading. And my deal with myself is this: if I come to my desk and I'm present physically and mentally, if nothing comes of it, that's okay. I don't beat myself up. I only beat myself up if I could have been there and didn't go or found a way to distract myself that was trivial. I like the volcano plan of Ann Hood, but for me, I think of Flaubert's daily fidelity to the desk. And also the idea, he said, Be regular and ordinary in your everyday life so you can be wild and original in your work.
Wow, I like that. I wish I could write every day. I can. I try, but I can't. But then when I do it like in spurts. But
Mhm.
I do appreciate the quote that you shared because I think it's really, really relevant. So for people who are trying to write, whether they write every day or they write volcano style, what are some real actionable writing tips that you could share, especially as a writing teacher?
I would just say that reading is as important as writing. And I think this is something we know, but if you're only reading things on screens, studies show that we are not as engaged and we don't remember things as well. And, even they track our eye movements and they see our eyes are flitting off the screen more often. And, all these things that show it's just not the same as reading with a real book. So I say, go ahead and like put your phone across the room, mute the ringer and get a real book and remember the pleasure of that experience. You can't produce it for someone if you don't feel it yourself. I think that we are in danger of losing the habit of reading deeply, reading radically.
I agree. And what about with writing? Like any tips how to write a compelling first sentence or end with a punch or something like that?
Well, I think we use transitions a lot more than we need to. And I think we dilute what we're trying to say by working so hard to connect it all. And I think we should trust our readers that they can make the leaps if the leaps have their own kind of logic. There's a great book by Verlin Klinkenborg. And at one point he says about transitions, you can get anywhere from anywhere always and almost instantaneously. And I love the permission in that we don't need to have these slow and laborious transitions. Just we can be faster and fleeter. We can drop some of that baggage. So that's one thing I think is trans genre. I mean, I think no matter what form you're writing in, that's really helpful.
Can you give an
Um,
example of that, like in action, what somebody might do, an amateur might write that's, transitional in nature?
Well, like someone describing crossing a room or making time pass really slowly when really we can just jump ahead and pick up, when the conversation resumes that night at dinner.
Ah,
I think often we're wasting too much time with those less interesting transitions.
okay, I see what you're saying. And sometimes it's people give too much information, I feel. They're like, he crossed the room carelessly. uh,
Right.
just kind of, first of all, nix the adverbs half the time, I feel.
Hmm.
Do you
Oh
agree?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
They weaken sentences, don't they?
they
Usually.
do.
But I also believe, and I've said this before on the program, if you are become a master of your craft, which you certainly are, you can break rules and things that another writer might not be able to get away with because they don't have the understanding of the craft. I think that somebody who's a master of the craft can do that. I mean, like E. Cummings is an example of a poet and a writer who did that. Do you agree with that, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of fun in learning the rules just so hopefully later one can break them. But I mean, Picasso could draw like an angel before he did all of his modernist experimentation. So I'm a big fan of putting in the work.
Yeah. Is there something that you're working on now, like a new project?
There is, it's kind of inchoate right now. I can't really probably describe it all so well, but I think I'm writing a book that's alternating regular essay length memoirs with sections of micro-memoirs.
Beautiful. Oh, that I'm sure it's so many people will be able to use that, and I definitely want to include that in my arsenal for everything that I'm teaching. Beth Ann, this has been such a great conversation.
I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and we've got a date now for a cocktail somewhere to talk about all these things we have in common. But thank you for the work you're doing and putting out in the world as well.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And everyone, heating and cooling, you must get this book. Thank you. follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.